Hello, hello. Can I ask you please to be seated and we'll move the program along. This is a very important session. Sometimes at events such as this that focus on matters of peace and security, the acknowledgement of the important role of business is overlooked. We are different. We recognise how important business is as a player in the relation to these issues, and we're thrilled to have with us today a particularly important player, and that's Northrop Grumman, and in particular the Chairman, Chief Executive Officer and President of Northrop Grumman Corporation, Wes Bush. You have the lady from down south. Can you please be quiet? You know, just a visitor to Washington DC, doesn't know the protocol. Texans, yeah. Wes Bush has a most impressive CV. You have his bio in your papers. He's been had these three roles at Northrop Grumman, culminating with chairman in 2011. Held previous senior roles with Northrop Grumman in the space technology area. He seemed to have come to the company through another company, TRW, where he served as President and Chief Executive Officer of their UK-based Global Aeronautical Systems. His background is in that area, and I learned yesterday that he in fact worked for a year in Australia, in or around Alice Springs. Because you're in this field, you know what happens in this area, in and around Alice Springs, that we don't talk about. But we are always pleased to have Americans in Alice Springs experiencing a little bit of the Australian culture. For those of you who have lived in Alice Springs, you'd know what I mean. It's a unique environment. Wes was educated at MIT and at UCLA, and of course Northrop Grumman, you know, as one of the major defence industry companies in the world, and obviously particularly here in the United States, and is an important partner of Australia in providing and supporting our defence capabilities. I might just tell Wes that something that should please him. Northrop Grumman provided the radar for our airborne early warning and control aircraft, which we call Wedgetail. This is state-of-the-art technology, and in fact this radar, which is affixed to the top of a Boeing aircraft, was so advanced that it was said to be beyond the boundaries of physics, and I thought that was some hugely demanding defence official in Australia that set the parameters for that contract. But was told yesterday it was Northrop Grumman set it for themselves, and then realised it was impossible. But somehow or other they did the job. And the important part of this story is that the first of those aircraft is now operating over Iraq, providing situation awareness for our fighter aircraft that are bombing in our interests, in the interests of the United States, and the interests of people who believe in peace and freedom. And I spoke to our Chief of Defence, Chief of Air Force only a week or two ago, and he said it was doing a marvellous job. Australia's never had that capability, and so that shows how important Northrop Grumman is as a partner to us. Northrop Grumman is now investing more in Australia, and we're pleased about that, and we look forward to a long and useful collaboration, we being Australia and the company Northrop Grumman. So as Wes comes to the dais, I have to read something. It says, "We are pleased to have Mr. Bush here to speak today and the interest of full disclosure and transparency, and in the interest of full disclosure and transparency, we acknowledge that Northrop Grumman is a donor to the Brookings Institution. I think it's a good thing that you're a donor to the Brookings Institution. Mr. Wes Bush.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was a little concerned where that statement was going, but I was glad to see how it came out there at the end. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and particularly the opportunity to follow such tremendous speakers and individuals who have clearly dedicated so much of their careers and their lives to public service, both Foreign Minister Bishop and Undersecretary Wormuth. It was, for me, sitting here listening to them, just an opportunity to learn myself about a number of dimensions of the relationship with Australia that are so incredibly important, not only today, but as we think about the future. I was asked, as Robert said, to talk a little bit about the business side of the relationship. And we often use the word alliance. I know we call this Alliance 21. You know, and we all have our own context for these things, but I often see the word alliance as sort of the relationships you feel like you need to have. And my perspective with Australia is it's more of a friendship. It's the type of relationship you want to have. And for a long time, I've had the opportunity to understand that relationship and to be a part of it. As Robert mentioned, my first exposure to Australia was actually the very first year that I was married. My wife and I moved to that part of the country, lovely part of the country. I actually love it. I was a young engineer, and my wife Natalie was a young nurse working for the government of the Northern Territory, actually. So we had just a wonderful experience. But we really became advocates of this relationship between our two countries. And for us, that coordinate system of friendship is the way that we think about that relationship with Australia. Now, like most friendships, the relationship between Australia and the U.S. really does encompass a very broad spectrum of interests. And defense, of course, has been an area of incredibly close cooperation between our two countries for many, many decades. And the defense relationship continues to be important, and I think will only continue to grow in importance. But it is also a fundamental underpinning of other aspects of the relationship. Trade, investment, all of those things go to that deep connection between economic security and national security. But as has been said earlier, and I thought Lyndon did a great job of really laying it out, the friendship between our country rests on a more fundamental basis of shared values, shared experiences, shared commitments. And as I've had the opportunity to interact with other business leaders and, of course, government leaders in Australia, I've had a chance to see how this relationship has grown and how it continues to mature. And one of the things that I think is an underpinning of that is actually much of what is happening in Australia itself. Australia is clearly a dynamic, fast-growing, and leading-edge economy, driven by so many of the same things that are driving the economy here in the U.S. From energy and resource production to advanced technology, our two countries provide each other with a vast array of opportunities for partnerships. And those partnerships extend, of course, between industries, between government and industry, but also between universities and other important enterprises that have to come together to shape the future that we all are working to create. Now, those opportunities are the result, as I said, of all the things that we have in common, including a deep appreciation of education, as Foreign Minister Bishop said, the rule and power of law, freedom and the free market, and the dominant role of intellectual capital in our high-tech world. Clearly, as we think about the future, I think it's important to put our finger on those common interests and make sure that we actually are using that common language to ensure that we're talking about the same things and we have a view that helps us continue to be aligned on it. And this type of forum, I think, is just the perfect opportunity for such a conversation, and particularly because it's a forum where it's easy to bridge back and forth between the topics that serve to address both national and economic security of the free markets that we all work to make sure that continue to go forward. So as I think about where we are in the foundation that we have, we clearly have had many years to build the foundation, but more importantly, we need to be looking forward. That foundation is so important, and we can be glad for it, because the Pacific region is so central to the futures of both of our countries. And it is a region that's under tremendous pressure at many different levels and on many different quarters. And I think it'd be fair to ask how our economic relationship can be expected to cope with the growing security challenges that our national leaders see fit to address, especially in this time of tightening defense budgets in both countries. And I think one important answer to that question would be the same way we've always done it, by falling back on the one thing that has never let us down. And that is our collective commitment to a free market economy that is driven by innovation and technological superiority. If you turn the clock back during the Cold War, our commitment to a market-driven economy and technological superiority was how we managed to outcompete a command economy that was willing to defer the needs and desires of their people in the service of massive defense production. It's actually quite a neat combination, combining free market economy with technology and innovation. It was economic strength and technological superiority that allowed the world's free nations to create a solid defense deterrent while keeping defense expenditures within single-digit percentages of GNP. Now, those of us in the defense industry like the higher single-digit percentages, but nevertheless, it's actually quite a neat trick if you compare what happened here to what happened in other countries that we were competing with. But also, in the process of doing that, the scientific and technological advances that were made eventually translated into consumer value and improved standards of living for all of our people. Quite a tremendous outcome. I think that same market perspective and commitment to technological superiority must now be applied to the challenges of our common interests in the Asian-Pacific region and, quite frankly, around the globe. The good news is that those challenges lend themselves nicely to the types of solutions that our partnership has successfully generated by working together for many, many years. As an example of a challenge that we face together, it's the Pacific Ocean itself. As the Pacific Ocean becomes increasingly important, it is the largest single geographic feature on the planet and one that has so many resources and represents, in many respects, both the avenues and the constraints to getting things done. We have to understand what is happening. So an important challenge is staying apprised of the developments on it, above it, and below its surface. In years past, these demands of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance might have been met by acquiring very large numbers of ships, manned aircraft, and legions of highly trained people. We can't afford to do that. Today, though, we can, together, satisfy much of these demands with far fewer platforms and far fewer people. Whether we are using unmanned airborne and underwater vehicles or satellites or advanced manned air capabilities, as Robert described a moment ago, technology is making this daunting challenge something that we can together reasonably address. And our commitment to technological superiority will be critical to solving any of the many cybersecurity challenges that are facing us that the previous two speakers both addressed. In our increasingly knowledge-based economies, technological superiority will underpin the national and economic security strategy of both of our countries in the future, just as it has in the past. So if that's the case, then surely our alliance will be enhanced through deliberate cooperation in the development of these advanced technologies, development on both sides of the Pacific, by industry in both countries, contributing to the requirements in both the U.S. and in Australia. So I'll talk a little bit about how that's happening and some of the important criteria for success here. But let me start with an example. Australia's Defence Science and Technology Organization, or the DSTO, and several of the companies that comprise our collective defense industry have entered into strategic alliances and relationships that promise great advances in technological capabilities, regional security, and in the economic health of an industry that must be allowed to remain economically healthy and vital. But let's keep in mind that as we create these things, the success or failure in achieving the promises of these types of relationships will depend on the policies of the governments that ultimately have control over them. For example, in the U.S., one of the major barriers that we have faced over quite a few decades now have been the export and the import control rules that are often applied even to our closest friends, such as Australia. Now, I'm delighted that the U.S. government, and particularly this administration, has committed itself to rationalizing and updating these regulations. It's an example of the very pragmatic policy actions we have to take to enable the two countries to work together effectively, particularly when it comes to advanced technology. Let me stress that the advantages of alliances between DSTO and the defense industry will spill over into Australia's economy and to the U.S. economy as well. In fact, they already are. Several American defense companies have already expanded their partnership and engagement with Australian suppliers, and that expansion continues. Many of those relationships were created through Australia's Defence Material Organisation, or the DMO, specifically the DMO's Global Supply Chain Program. That program is showing tremendous progress. It focuses on developing opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises to export their work internationally. This allows them to support global supply chains like those of some of the larger companies in the defense industry, companies like Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and others. That DMO program is producing results that benefit the defense industries of both countries. Some examples. FARA of Brisbane is now doing machining work on the F-18 Hornet. Quickstep in Sydney is providing composites for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. And CEA of Canberra has provided advanced radar equipment for several major U.S. defense programs. But more can and will be done to provide greater access for Australian firms seeking international opportunities. And from the perspective of the companies in the U.S., this provides an incredible capability in the supply chains and furthers our collective technological superiority. Now, you might have guessed from my remarks that I am a big fan of technological superiority, which I believe lies at the heart of any cooperative effort to safeguard the Pacific region and the regions beyond. But there's another theme in play as well. In fact, this theme makes technological superiority possible. It's partnership. It's real partnership, the complicated kind of partnership that requires commitment at all levels. Commitment to the basics of research, to applied research, and to the actual development of products and the availability of those products. Real partnerships have to address the government policy roadblocks that often hinder progress. So we have to have the relationships built to openly and candidly address them. Government to government relationships, government to industry, industry to industry. But also at the center of many of these relationships, we also need to engage the great research universities in Australia and in the U.S. Real partnerships have to be all-inclusive and omnidirectional if they are to bear fruit in the arena of innovation. And because the heart and soul of technological superiority turns out to be intellectual capital, the partnership with educational institutions, I think, is among the most important of all of these. The fundamental commitment of that type of partnership with education must be the creation and delivery of world-class intellectual capital that is able to drive that technological superiority. And the challenge of staying ahead is getting tougher as technology expands around the globe. So the old paradigms and patterns of coming together are really no longer sufficient. Industry, so I'll take this one on our side, can no longer stand to simply be a financial partner with education. We're now seeking new methods and new models of partnership that are producing results that serve a broad range of interests, from those of the students themselves to those of industry and to the objectives that are stated by the colleges and the universities. The defense industry partners are working with colleges and universities to identify the needs of industry, in other words, the highly technical jobs, and to work with the universities to help shape curriculum and to help shape the research activities that will supply the graduates that we collectively need to satisfy those objectives. As with any partnership, success in this endeavor is coming one step at a time. And so, for example, we're making as a company several important first steps to reach out and engage with the universities in Australia. And I'll give you just some of those examples, and we're very public about them, as I would say are our peers in industry, because we want these partnerships to be built not by just individual companies, but by the groups of companies. And we think this is an area where we really need to be coming together. We have a partnership with the University of Sydney, wherein Northrop Grumman is partnering for research and development into small space satellites and unmanned and autonomous aerospace technologies. We're also working with the University of New South Wales and the Australian Defence Force Academy to pursue the development of sovereign cyber capabilities. At Dixon College, we support scholarships and grants in support of science and engineering, and we sponsor such events as the Outback UAV Challenge and the VEX Robotics Challenge. We're trying to find ways and avenues across the spectrum of intersection to not only encourage young folks to go into the STEM fields, but to actually align the educational curriculum and the development of the workforce with the needs that we have, not only in our industry, but also in government, to ensure that we can sustain that technological superiority. The efforts represent good starts, but they're by no means where they need to be to really realize their potential. And I might add that that potential extends to our common non-security interests as well, such as the life sciences and other areas of fast-paced technological innovation. So I'm a big believer in industry's role in affecting these partnerships, and what we seek are others who are as eager to make them happen. More and better partnerships, I believe, are needed to ensure that we're going to be able to produce that technological superiority that our nations are going to need to assure the aspirations of our common interests and our common humanity for prosperity, security, and stability. I think our joint commitment to market-driven economies and that technological superiority really has never let us down so far. And as long as we can stay committed to it, as long as we cultivate it and value it as our foremost national security asset, the struggle to maintain peace, freedom, and the rule of law in the Pacific Hemisphere will be conducted on our terms, not the terms of those who would violate those principles. But we have work to do to make sure we can really achieve that objective. Our current technological preeminence is not ours by tenure or birthright. It came to us through hard work and through commitment and partnerships at every conceivable level of government, industry, academia, and other important enterprise. As in decades past, our preeminence must be cultivated, polished, fed, and argued for if it is to be there when we need it. We must never forget that the pace of technology is moving so fast that once lost, that technological preeminence might never be recovered. There's an old test pilot saying that you've never been lost until you've been lost at Mach 5. The pace of technology really is moving at that speed, Mach 5 and beyond, and given the stakes, we cannot afford to get lost. The watchwords are vision, effort, and ceaseless persistence. But the keys are partnerships, as I said, between industry, government, academia, and others. The objectives are the synergies between our two nations, enhanced economic, national, and global security, and better lives for our peoples. So thanks again for the opportunity to join in this event today, which further evidences the partnership between our countries. I'm glad to be a part of this very worthwhile undertaking, and I look forward to working with all of you to ensure its success as we move forward. Thank you. Over there?
Keep talking and it'll all magically happen. Thanks very much for that, Wes. That's very useful. And of course, for us in our region, there was a time where maintaining a technological edge wasn't so difficult. It's that time was now some time ago.
Oh, yes.
It's changed very, very quickly. So the partnership with the mass and the research might of the US and companies arising out of this culture is so important to us. Now, questions. We've got a reasonable time for questions. We've caught up time. So who wants to start? We'll start with the woman down here in the third row, and then there's somebody in the second back row on the left.
Hello, my name is Li Yang. Thanks for your presentation. And your company and defense department are usually well known about their abuse and waste. And so I just wonder if you are affiliated with some university for technology, I just wonder if you are voluntarily contributed to your dollar or equipment to the university, or you bring or ask for more money to your company from university or government. What I mean is the public sectors or taxpayers' money. So I just wonder if you would be able to promote with your money, with your company money, to promote democracy. I mean the real democracy. I mean people got the power rather than your company have a profit over the people.
Right. And who are you representing?
I'm representing the world citizens.
Oh, right. So got a question on behalf of the world citizens.
So let me give a little bit of a perspective that I think is important, particularly because I think part of your question went to the relationships between companies and universities. Oftentimes there is a perspective that from a university side of things that perhaps it isn't the right thing to do to become involved with a company because companies clearly have a profit motive. Companies work on behalf of their shareholders. And might that somehow impede academic freedom or other aspects that are held so dearly in universities? And I think for some period of time, that actually held some universities back in terms of their ability to work with companies. We're seeing much more progressive thinking today across the globe, but particularly here in the U.S. and I would say in Australia, that the recognition is that we actually get to achieving our objectives more quickly, more efficiently, by working together. And yes, we have to be careful to protect academic freedoms. And I think every well-known university and every well-considered university has mechanisms in place to make sure that that happens. But we do make more progress in working together. We always do. And particularly where that progress is focused on areas that are so important around the globe, areas that are driving our ability to be secure. You know, the university environment, I think, is probably, if we think about where that stands today, it is a hotbed of innovation. And it's that way because of the relationships that universities have been creating, sort of busting out of perhaps some of the long-held constraints they impose on themselves, the relationships that they're creating more broadly with government, and the relationships that they're creating more broadly with industry. So as we go forward, I hope to see that continue to grow. I think it serves all of us very well, both from our national security perspective as well as our economic security.
As Australia, I think it's fair to say, have been slow learners in that regard. Our universities are overwhelmingly public institutions, whereas they've always been prepared to take donations. For a long time, they were uncomfortable with the idea of corporate investing in the institutions for corporate interests, but the reality is that you need to build, for a good university, you need to build a resource base, and they really can't afford not to now. And those that have learned from the experience have realised that the benefits have far outweighed any downside.
Well, let me also add, though, that I think it is incumbent on companies that engage with universities to bring to that partnership more than a view of what is going to benefit the company. So as an example, when we partner with universities to focus on workforce development, we know that we're not going to get all of the graduates that come out of those programs. We're doing it from a broader view that that is what is necessary to enable the outcomes that are needed to support the broader set of objectives. Will we attempt to hire as many of those attractive graduates as we can? Absolutely we will. But we go into it not doing a piece of math on specific return on investment. Responsible companies approach it from a broader view that this is actually a part of the role that we play in the broader ecosystem of innovation. And I think it can be very, very productive for both universities and for industry.
Yep, I agree. Question at the back.
Morning, Andrea Shalal, or good afternoon, Andrea Shalal with Reuters. Wes, you've spoken in the past about these export control restrictions, particularly with concern about the export of unmanned vehicles, yes, unmanned area vehicles. Can you give us an update on where you think that conversation has evolved to, and whether you think that the U.S. government is starting to see your point of view on that?
Yeah, you know, it has been an interesting evolution over the last 5 years, and Andrea, I know you've been following this very closely. If you turn the clock back, you know, to about 5 years ago, it was almost an impossible conversation. The notion that we would be exporting not only some of our unmanned vehicle capability, but some of our truly autonomous vehicle capability. The recognition, I think, has grown quite rapidly, and I have to give the leadership of the Department of Defense credit for this. The recognition has grown that if we are not the ones who are going to be exporting it and working with our allies on the future development of that, that technology is already going to happen, whether we're engaged in it or not. So there are many countries around the world that are working on this technology, and we're far better to be in a place where we are working collaboratively with our allies to realize the benefit of those technologies for the alliances than to simply stand back, put a wall around it, and say to everyone else, go see what you can do on your own. So there's been a lot of progress in this. Now, are we all the way through that yet? No, not quite yet. I would say we have great progress at DoD. There is an awakening within the State Department that this is probably the right vector. But as you know, there are many parts of the approval process. We've had some very, very good outcomes. Australia's interest and the great support of that interest in large unmanned systems, the Triton program, as an example, is one where there's been great support. Clearly, the announcements in both Japan and Korea over the last couple of years and their interest in those similar platforms, great support for that. So I do see a lot of progress. I think we still have some work to do in front of us, but it's on the right vector. I feel a lot better about it now than I did just a few years ago.
It's still difficult for Australian defence, specialist defence industry to sell into the United States. Mm-hmm. The rules have been improved, but they are still very difficult. Mm-hmm. You know, I actually produce the best ship in the world, but you can't sell it to the Americans. Unless, of course, I build a shipyard in the US first. Now, question at the back on the left. A couple of other examples. You heard yours. Nolka was another one that's gone well.
Yes.
But that has American investment in the
well.
decoy system that's on American ships. And came out of DSTO originally.
Very good example of the success.
Morand, small engineering companies, also contributing to the JSF project. Questioning.
I want to change the subject just slightly. Lauren Hershey, I was a guest scholar here from the Antitrust Division back in the 1980s, and we met in the back, Wes, a few minutes or a couple of hours ago now. This is really for both of you, if you can respond. In the United States, there's a lot of discussion about the needs of the education system, and one of those topics that came up was in the State of the Union speech last night, related to the idea of 14 years of education, including community college. I wonder if Northrop has a position on this. This is the American workforce. I wonder if at all in Australia, sir, given your responsibilities over the last couple of decades, you already solved the problem and maybe could give some guidance to the United States. I don't know the merits. I'm not taking sides. I'm not an advocate. This is a citizen of the United States kind of question. Also, I'm kind of curious as to the number of jobs that exist here in the United States under Northrop, and how many of your jobs or employees are overseas, if you know the numbers. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me touch on the higher education piece of it for just a moment. And I have a particular interest in this. I've been a member of the Business Higher Education Forum for many years and chaired it just a couple of years ago. And that question has been right at the center of much of the debate. You know, we all clearly see a great role and a great need for having extraordinarily good research universities and many tiers within our higher education system. And I think as both here in the U.S. and in Australia, that's well supported. But we also see as we increasingly move into an advanced manufacturing economy, which I think is right in front of us here in the U.S. and I think can also be at the doorstep in Australia, we see a great need for individuals who don't necessarily have a 4-year education, but perhaps have the benefit of a 2-year education and learning the skills that go with programming, the skills that go with the 2-year form of education with mathematics, to enable that next step in our economy in advanced manufacturing. So there's a lot of energy going into, and I know the President made reference to some of this as well, a lot of energy going into thinking about what the 2-year schools should look like, what the community college programs should look like, and how that might better prepare a new workforce to step up to this emerging set of opportunities. As a company, we're very supportive of that. We have quite a few relationships, of course, with 4-year and more universities and higher education, but we're also developing the relationships with the community colleges and attempting to focus the energy there around the development of that workforce that's going to be so vital to the advanced manufacturing economy. And oh, by the way, those are extraordinarily good jobs. Starting salaries in those jobs can be in the $60,000, $70,000 range. So when you look around the U.S. today, actually, there are a very large number of openings in those positions, and there's not a supply of the talent to fill them. So we're all, I think, well motivated to think about how to get the educational process best aligned to support those needs as we go forward. In terms of you asked a specific question about Northrop Grumman. We're this year, look back at 2014, right around 87% domestic, right around 13% international.
Some of them in Australia now.
Quite a few in Australia, actually.
We won't count that. That's it. Brent? Well, Brendan answers. I'd say that I think we went through a phase where we forgot the importance of trade schools and technical education. Every community college had to become a university. And so in recent years, we've suffered a shortage of those skills and have had to import labour in the area. I think we're slowly learning now that we need to be more flexible.
Yes.
Technical jobs are important jobs, good jobs, and well-paying jobs.
They are.
Brendan, former Education Minister.
Thanks, Robert. Global citizen too, and I thank you for the representation I've had today. I'm also a former Science Minister and former Education Minister, and just a couple of things, Wes. You mentioned in your speech, which was extremely good, that you're open to, as I understand it, the idea of not just Northrop Grumman, but other defence companies in the industry making a collective commitment to the area of education. In this context, you're talking about universities. So am I right in thinking, for example, you could have Northrop, Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon, BAE, Thales and so on pooling? Now, if that happened, that would be extraordinarily good.
Fabulous.
The problem that we've certainly experienced, and Robert alluded to one of them, is that we created a culture in which young people felt that their lives were valued by their educational choices. If they didn't have a college education, they were of lesser value to their families, their country and so on, and we've made some adjustments in that regard. But the problem that we've had is teachers. The quality of teacher training, the ability, let alone the everything else, for teachers to inspire students at senior primary and then certainly secondary school to pursue continuing education in sciences. Would you, for example, be open to, along with your peer companies, to the idea of developing those sort of career paths which are founded on inspirational teaching, and the community model to which we were just referring, in fact, whilst traditionally as applied in a liberal arts context, could easily, I think, at least in Australia, be adapted for the purpose that your industry needs for applied manufacturing. So.
Yeah, Brendan, I think it is just a brilliant remark, and actually one that has action behind it already. If you look at what many of the defense companies are doing today, and I would say that more broadly, the aerospace companies are doing today, over the last decade, we have shifted our focus in K through 12 from largely a classroom focus to a teacher focus. And the idea is exactly as you described it, creating inspiration in the classroom through the teacher, because that's where, for those of us that can recall back through, K through 12, we all had someone who sparked us and creating that type of an environment where teachers feel that they are both valued and they're given the resources that they need, and they're also given the experiences that they need. And by that I mean many of the science and mathematics teachers, if you survey teachers over the course of their career, after they have been teaching, in particular in K through 12, for about 5 to 7 years, they often begin to lose a feel of connection to their discipline, whether it's mathematics or science. So many of the aerospace companies have programs where we bring those teachers into our facilities over the course of the summer, and they work as mathematicians and scientists and bring that experience back into the classroom. We also sponsor a number of programs where we select high-performing math and science teachers and expose them to different experiences. We had a program that we ran for many years called the Weightless Flights of Discovery, where we took high school science teachers, trained them how to do something in zero gravity, had them work with their classroom to develop an experiment that they would conduct in zero gravity, and then we put them on one of these flights that flew parabolas, and they would be floating around on the inside of the aircraft conducting their experiment. We would film it, bring it back into the classroom. So I very much resonate with what you're saying, that the focus on teachers really is the point of leverage and the opportunity for us. So yes to collaboration with the companies, and we're doing it actually today, and I think we could be more effective in doing it in the work that we have underway in Australia. And yes to the focus on teachers. I think all of those are home runs.
Question, middle of the room on the right-hand side.
Thank you. John Watts from Noetic Group. I just wanted to touch on some of the points you talked about technological superiority earlier on. Defence has done a huge amount in recent years experimenting with new technologies and concepts of operation and how to employ them. But there are some even more radical technologies out there that both yours and a lot of other large and small companies have been developing. And I'm talking about exoskeletons, UUVs, autonomous land vehicles, virtual reality. The military can be a conservative organisation at times. I think there's a growing recognition within defence circles, both in think tanks and within the Pentagon, of the importance of experimentation and prototyping. And simultaneously, there's a lot of looking to industry to lead the way in innovation. A lot of the things I hear often is, we used to do this very well, but now we're being beaten by Apple et al., and we need to look to them and Silicon Valley to look for innovation. I was wondering if you could comment on that state at the moment and how large defence companies who are innovating, who are coming up with radical new ideas, can help to develop the concepts of operation and the ways to employ those technologies as we kind of transition to a new form of warfare.
I think it is a really important question, and one that goes to the heart of actually much of the introspection that we see within the Department of Defense today with respect to how to take the innovation that's already happening and more quickly convert it into products and capabilities that are fielded. Again, this is a pendulum that swings back and forth, and having been in the industry now for quite a while, I've seen it move in both directions. We have to get back to a place where there is incentive for more risk-taking in our collective customer community. And that's difficult, particularly in times of greater austerity, because the downside of something not working is felt more greatly. But I have to give Frank Kendall, the Undersecretary for Acquisition Technology and Logistics in the Pentagon, a lot of credit for this. Frank has personally taken on the agenda of driving innovation. And to one of the points you made, yes, there is a role for reaching out to the technologies that are popping up in the commercial space, but there is also a role for proprietary defense technology that is, in most cases, actually a bit more advanced and we're able to manage it in a way where we keep the technological superiority for ourselves. The analogy I use, if the technology is available to everyone, it's kind of hard to be superior. So we need to be in a place where we are actually still ahead. And that requires that more innovative capacity to not only develop things in the lab, but actually get them out there and testing them. We actually, and I could, unfortunately in this form I can't name them, but I could name for you in the right form. Every single one of the services is doing this now. They're doing it in different ways, but they are taking this initiative to go and try things more quickly and where things are working, turn that into product. So I'm seeing energy in this direction. But ultimately, we have to give back to the acquisition agencies the authority to fail. You have to be able to fail if you're going to take advantage of innovation. And we've got to get the pendulum reset in that one.
Time for a last question. Because the flip side is that a lot of defence technologies have actually contributed to commercial successes as they've been released. And think of things like lasers and so forth that may have started in a defence lab but now have a huge commercial application in so many ways. Yep. And by the way, if you want to collaborate in advanced manufacturing in Australia, we'll have a talk with you after.
All right. Good.
Another citizen here, Steve Winters. I wonder,
we like citizens.
I've heard actually talk by Mr. Kendall that you mentioned, and he pointed out the fact that over the last 2 decades, the number of independent defense contractors in the U.S. has gone down radically from maybe several dozen to maybe 5, 6 or 7. What is the impact of that? Because it would seem that the risk, I mean, you get too big to fail, that type of thing. How do you view that consolidation into a small number of contractors such as Lockheed Martin?
Yeah, I think in any industry there's a natural life cycle to the structure of an industry. And as you mature in terms of your capabilities, the consolidations make sense because what it allows you to do fundamentally, if you look at a company such as ours, we're able to manage our cost structure much more efficiently and thereby set aside more capacity for research and development. And that's exactly what we've done in this defense downturn. You know, we've, like all of the companies in our space, we've had to reduce our headcount, we've had to reduce our footprint. But one thing that we did through the downturn was we maintained R&D. And I think it is a reflection of a very fulsome understanding of what our mission is as an enterprise. So I think there are great advantages to that. You know, I look at the scale of a company like Northrop Grumman. We have about 65,000 employees. Almost half of those employees are degreed scientists, engineers, mathematicians, technologists of one form or another. The benefit you get in having that scale of capability that comes together and innovates is incredible. So I'm actually excited about what we have in our industry today, not just in our company, I'll admit. You know, other companies in our industry are doing exciting things like this as well. So there's a great vibrancy in the R&D part of the defense industry today. We just can't expose all of it.
Roughly what percentage would be your R&D budget?
Again, we generally don't disclose that fully, yes.
Well, I'll put the question differently. With the large American defence companies, roughly what percentage?
If you count,
I'm just a bit interested.
And I think you should, if you count what our customers are investing in us for development, it's generally 30 to 40% of our revenues go in that direction, which is phenomenal.
The trouble in Australia is we've tended to rely on government to pay for that. And it's now a problem because if governments are not paying for it.
Well, there is clearly a role for government, but I think there is also a role, as I mentioned earlier, and I should make this remark very specifically. I am excited about the pace of technology development I see in Australia.
Yeah.
You know, when I have the opportunity to get out, see what's going on in the universities, see what's going on in many of the companies that have been launched in Australia, there are some fabulous advanced technology developments underway in the country. And that's why I'm so excited about the partnership. I really see that the coming together of those capabilities is going to provide some great results.
And that seems a good note on which to end this session.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.